Welcome to the E-commerce Profits Podcast, where we feature top founders and experts in the e-commerce industry and take an in-depth look at the struggles and successes in growing e-commerce brands profitably.
All right, Josh Chin here. I'm the host of the E-commerce Profits Podcast, where we feature top experts, entrepreneurs, and shakers in the e-commerce industry, and we go behind the scenes of the struggles and successes in growing a brand. Now, this episode is brought to you by Chronos.agency. If you run a direct-to-consumer e-commerce brand that is ready to scale and to double your customer lifetime value through lifecycle marketing, Chronos is your company. We have helped hundreds of brands scale profits with email, SMS, and mobile push marketing while getting an average of 3,500% ROI from our efforts. We've worked with brands like Truly Beauty, The Oodie, Dr. Living Good, and many more. Now, the next step is to email us at sales@chronos.agency, or you can go to chronos.agency to learn more. Today's guest is Stormy Simon. Stormy has a really interesting background. She is the former president of Overstock.com. She joined Overstock in 2001 during the formative years of e-commerce as a temp. And at the time, revenue was less than 20 million. Staff was under 100 people. In her career, she's gone from being an executive assistant to the branding arm, customer care, VP of customer care, to CMO, and eventually becoming president and board member. Over her 15-year career, Overstock became a top 25 e-tailer in America by traffic and grew to nearly $2 billion in revenue and had approximately 1,600 employees. Stormy is an unconventional leader who charged straight into the workforce, bypassing college and business school. And one of her proudest achievements was growing the ranks of female executives at Overstock from 7% to 33%. We'll talk a little bit about that during the show as well. In 2016, Stormy stepped down from the presidency at Overstock and entered the budding world of cannabis. A mother of 2 grown sons and 3 grandchildren, Simon is a longtime resident of Tooele County. I hope I pronounced that right.
Yep.
She also had the honor, interestingly, of presiding over the first gay marriage in the county in 2011. Stormy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
You have one of the most interesting stories and backgrounds of any guest I've had on the show. Tell
awesome.
us about how you ended up in Overstock, and how do you stay in one company for 15 years and rise basically from literally the lowest of ranks to literally the highest of ranks?
Yeah, well, a lot of moving, a lot of hustling. I mean, in order to do that, you've got to have your eyes open, especially when you think about where e-commerce was at that time. The word e-commerce didn't even exist. We were calling it e-tail or online shopping, and our advertisements, that's what it would say. So it was a very different world. I think timing of walking in there when I did and feeling like, seeing that people didn't know, we were developing a business as it went, and then being able to share ideas because nobody really knew the right answer. We were just figuring it out. Honestly, just raising my hand throughout that time and, paying attention to all of the details as things were happening. I mean, it was such a fast moving time that it's like, how did you do it? I just didn't stop running. I just kept going, kept raising my hand, kept doing the stuff, it was going so fast. And, fortunately, timing plays a piece of every story. The timing of walking through the door and then just being able to raise my hand and take a project and be able to see it through. And lucky for me, I had a really good batting average.
Very good batting average. Did you always know you were going to be successful in the business world? Was it an intention?
No. I, as a little girl, I would play like secretary because that's what, girls were. So I'd be like, I'm going to be a secretary and I'm going to type and I'm going to carry a briefcase. And, I always hoped I could wear a business suit for some reason, like in like grade school. And then I was a young mom at 17. So after that, there really wasn't like, oh, I have these big dreams of something. It was more like, oh my God, I have to raise these kids. I was divorced at 21. I have to raise these two boys. And that's the mission. The mission is to raise the kids and keep them fed and loved and all of the things. So that became the mission. And then, the steps within the mission of making that happen. I just made some good moves.
That's super interesting. Really good moves. And it's really unusual because you mentioned that, growing up, you're dreaming of becoming a secretary, and that was kind of that was the mindset of, I guess, most people.
I will tell you one thing. I have to tell you one thing. When I was in like fifth and sixth grade, I would watch the commercials on television and then rewrite them better. So I did always have a marketing mind where I'd be like, you know what, they should be doing this. And I would always have a different take on what they'd done.
Okay. Interesting. Now, I'm not sure about the landscape in 2001 and in the early 2000s, but obviously that was the early stages of the .com boom and e-commerce. But what about the whole? I'm sure there is a glass ceiling at a point in time, and to some degree, I guess, some difficulties in females rising up the ranks versus their male counterparts. Have you ever experienced anything like of that nature at Overstock?
Well, let's just say as a female, you experience it everywhere. My children are grown. I have grandchildren. I've lived through, the thing about it is, and I'm in Utah, it's a very conservative state. There's not a lot of women that have the opportunity or whatever it is, the timing, I talked about timing to achieve or get into those positions in the years past, pre-2016, #MeToo movement, those years past. So absolutely 100% throughout. I mean, there's a whole story about the glass ceiling that, where I was actually told by a boss at Overstock in the early days that there was a glass ceiling and that's what there would always be. So, yes. And then you kind of have to ignore it or, my younger years, you would have to accept it because it was just the way the world worked. Like that was just the way the world worked. You would be marginalized or it was definitely a boys' club. Like all of that is real. Now, as a female, you had to navigate it through that time. For me, can't speak of anyone else, but you have to navigate it. You have to, you can't, the world wasn't ready to be changed. So you have to join it, be aware of it, be wise to it. My mom made me wise to it, made me wise that there would be men that put my looks first and that would be the lead every time I spoke with them. Well, it turned out she was right. And so I'd have to take that lead and still be able to prove my value and smarts and ability to work harder than because of that, so never been a victim. Many, many stories of where, that was an issue or inappropriate things, and not always sexual either. #MeToo isn't all about a sexual movement. It's about the verbs that we use or the adjectives that we use to describe males versus females. I was referred to as hard-headed, most stubborn, tenacious, where my male counterparts were viewed as well-spoken, outspoken, confident, and a real aggressive guy in the boardroom or whatever. But they were very, very different. And it was always evident when men spoke of women versus men in the workplace.
Really
even when I was part of the club, because eventually you get in the club, but you're not really in the club because, I could tell you stories about, why you're not in the club. The things that are said where you just think, oh, geez, I am a sexual object and that's it. So why am I going to fight, this person on anything else? And not really even fight them, but try to prove yourself on anything else.
And a lot of times, like I'm assuming it's not an explicit aggression of any kind. It's kind of like an implicit thing where you're part of the board now. You're part of the club, but know your place in some shape or form.
100%. That's 100%. That's my dog snoring. I'm gonna make him stop.
No worries.
Yeah, it's 100%. You do. You know when to laugh. You know when to. Or, I trained myself that way. I mean, as silly as it sounds, and people would say, but I would never say I'm a victim. I was fully aware of what I was doing and what was happening. I had to play my part in order to fit their parts.
Stormy, it sounds like you didn't exactly go like straight on against the grain and like fight toxic masculinity or fight the norm. You understood the way things were, and you played to the beat, and you played to what
I fought it from there. It's not that I didn't fight it. I got female executive leadership from 7 to 33. We had a 25% female development in tech workforce, which was huge in like 2000, whatever it was. I hate to quote a year, but I remember I think it was actually 2014 where I did the analysis, and like 25% was huge, especially, in a company in Utah. So I fought it from I didn't fight it out loud. I fought it from behind the scenes, like little by little, tiny bite by tiny bite by tiny bite.
I'm curious, how did you do that? Kind of given the going from 7% to 33%, that's incredible in America, let alone Utah in like pre-2016, pre-2017. What were some of the things that you've done that helped as a leader in such a massive company?
Well, that's a broad, I also turned into like a hard ass executive that, that you read about, right? Like a Devil Wears Prada person. There were those days too. Absolutely. Yeah. Who was it? Was it Meryl Streep in that movie? Yeah, that was me. I was like, the pressure of that takes its toll too. But so I feel like I did it through performance. I would go in and I would perform, and I would, have an idea, discover the secret of the Big O campaign, and I would write it and do it for a budget, almost in circumstances that were impossible to succeed. Like the answer was, yes, you can do that, but your budget's this big. So can you really do it? And then I would do it. And then, I would reach success. So it was through performance and just hard work and ethics and showing up every day, and then always raising my hand for those moments of, whatever they were in a whiteboard of nothing. You're all of a sudden selling things online. It's like, I don't know, we're figuring out what to do. So just being there, showing up, being excited, having ideas, sharing them. And then I think most importantly, it really wasn't about me. It was about the win, right? My original reason for doing what I did and how I did it was I couldn't get fired. I had these boys at home. Like I had to. when I took a chance or changed a job or did something, I had to make it work. Failure was not an option at any point.
Do you remember the moment when that reason, that your purpose or your why changed from survival to now creating a better world for females?
Yeah, it's money, and it's really interesting that, so I was on welfare as, a young mom. I got divorced. I was on welfare. Thank goodness, that system helped me get my feet together. My ex lived in another state. He did pay child support, but I needed that system. I needed childcare and I needed housing and that whole system that is supplied. And then he paid back the system because I needed it that way. I needed more than just his child support or whatever. And that was such a savior for me. Like, it was great. I got to get on my feet. I got to figure out my life, and it was a foundation of which for me to step on. When I got through Overstock and got through, to where it was like, oh, wow, you could take a pause in your life. And, the CEO of Overstock was by no means over generous with his executives at any, it was a struggle for any of us to actually get a lot put away. However, generous enough for me to take a minute and take a break. Now we all, you say the whole world, all of us, everyone wants to do better, and everyone wants to be able to come from a place where they are able to advocate for a day, advocate for a person, advocate for a minute. But you know what? We can't, because we are bound by society, and society says you kind of can't do that unless you're working really hard and you have a minute and you have your family and you have, so when I think of people that want to do that, like advocate, just stay home, have your own moment. Like, there was a grind out there and I ran it too, and it was exhausting and scary and terrifying. And upon stopping, it was like, okay, I need to start helping people that are still running a grind or still caught up in an unjust system. And that's how you get there. That's where people get. And it's not a fair system because I think our hearts are all the same. But it is the way our world works.
Is that how you ended up in the cannabis industry after Overstock?
Yeah, the cannabis industry coincided with my leaving Overstock. It was, I jumped in the cannabis industry on September 9th and left Overstock on September 30th from the board. So it was super, like those 21 days of overlaps were super cool for me, because it was like, you know what? I just bridged these two worlds. Cannabis for me has always been something I'm comfortable with. Haven't been afraid of the plant. I have loved the plant within my own life. It's been a medicine, and I'm not ashamed to say that. It's unfortunate, the stigma that, our society wants to put on plants as a medicine and promote pharmaceuticals and billions of dollars of research as corporations. So jumping into cannabis, I actually jumped in out of curiosity. I just thought, okay, e-commerce happened right before my eyes. Like, nobody could have told me in 1990 that we'd be shopping online and all this stuff, all of it would have come from, online, delivered to my doorstep. I never would have believed it. So here we are with cannabis, and a teenager who liked it and was put in a box because of it and called, a stoner and whatever because of it. And in a very conservative state where, it was like the devil's lettuce. And I educated myself at that time through information that there was, which was High Times Magazine. And that was about it. When the states got ahead of the federal government, when Denver and Washington were like, you know what, we're going to legalize it for our states. I just thought, that's a magical moment. Like, that doesn't happen. The prohibition with alcohol, we have to think of things in our history and how it was handled. Things weren't handled well in America in some of these moves. Like, many of our moves in the 30s and the way that we did things, so those just not handled well. And then we can go on that. However, I jumped into cannabis because I wanted to be a part of something that was changing the world, literally going to change the way we looked at things. And it has. It really has. And it's giving the banks a run for their money, because we're going to be so, I went down the rabbit hole on all of the reasons why cannabis was prohibited and all of the reasons, what happened for this plant to be used for 10,000 years in multi-facets. Like, it's amazing what this one plant can do. In 1992, our endocannabinoid system is named. Why is it named an endocannabinoid system? Because it's named after the cannabis plant, which produces cannabinoids. So there's something in the basic answer is this, and science is power, and we will have power the more we research this plant. But basically, just to get your head around having a safety about it, your endocannabinoid system in this cannabinoid plant has some sort of matrix that works the same. So when we talk about CBDs, they jump in your body and they go to your inflammation and say, I'm going to go help your CB1 and CB2 receptors. I'm going to help your belly balance. I'm going to help your headache. Our body is functioning the way that plant is. That's a beautiful thing to discover. Yet we still didn't want to talk about it in science in 1992. So the thought that, we hear these anecdotal stories, which I can promise you are true because I have met the people firsthand. These are true stories. They add cannabis into their world and miracles happen. Why? I don't know, but we should have all been curious, and our government should have too, years and years ago. But instead, they made decisions based on, American corporations, the color of people's skins, prison for profits. And that's what their decisions were. And that's all attached to this plant in some form or another. So, to be a part of something so disruptive that our government still to this moment can't decide what to do.
Yeah.
Is pretty disturbing as a citizen that pays her taxes every single year. It's disturbing to me. But, I did expect, in my world, the states run faster. We can do better than the banking system as it is today.
Yeah.
We can do better than the medicine that is out there today. They've claimed an opioid crisis and they're not using cannabis to help it. So they're looking for pharmaceutical drugs to help people off of pharmaceutical addictions they created. So my whole world, I jumped into cannabis curious. What happened next was life-changing, and cannabis is absolutely the gateway to change, not to drugs and addiction and all the things that scare us, but to change. And you don't have to get high to do it. So that was my mission, is to begin talking about it, normalizing it, bringing it into conversations, talking about children and cannabis with THC in 2016 and 17 was early on. And yet, there's been a lot of changes, but still our federal government in regards to pediatric cancer and cannabis has not approved a single thing for these children.
Why do you think it's so hard for the federal government to recognize its potential? Why is it lagging behind what the states are doing?
Bureaucracy. Like, there's a lot of paperwork that's just added upon paperwork in order for us to, make sure every single thing about us is crossed and nobody's getting sued and everybody's within the right. They're looking so much. They're trying to be so precisely right that they're absolutely wrong. They're so precisely right. Like, throw a dart. If you hit, if you're near the bullseye, let's call it a start. But it's like, oh, no. Everybody's got to be perfect. Everything's got to be perfect. And we have to think of every single person and all the things. That's just how our government is. The other thing is personal interests, or however the lobbying world works, right? There's personal interests everywhere. So why are the Rockefellers? You can go back in time The Hearst family, why was hemp not allowed to be used for paper? Because the Hearst family owned 28 newspapers they owned lumber that created paper. So in those 28 newspapers, they wrote all about how bad hemp and marijuana was and how the Mexicans were bringing it. And oh my God, it's mayhem and all of the things. They used those 28 papers as propaganda against a bunch of stuff. And then you had, there's the medical association was fighting to keep cannabis as a medicine. You had other families connected with Pfizer and whatnot, all in the Senate floor in the 30s, fighting for their own interests. All of those things, laws were built around those things, protecting, creating how pharmaceuticals are made. Do you think you're going to break in the pharmaceutical industry? It's not going to happen. How about liquor? You know what I mean? Like the distribution of liquor is pretty tough to get into. Water, you want to try to sell water? That's a captured industry. So all these industries were captured before we were born. And then since then, there's just bureaucracy upon bureaucracy upon bureaucracy added onto it. So who knows? Nobody wants to read it all. Nobody wants to figure it out. And nobody wants to rock the apple cart to where it could affect their $1 million check, their child's college, their whatever.
Is that also the reason why you ended up in politics and why you ran for candidacy?
Yeah, in Utah 2020, we're going into a pandemic. I was pretty sure we were heading into it. Signed up to run and got the seat for the Democratic Party in the small county that I live in Utah, which is quite a red state. Very, very red. And I grew up here. I decided changed myself from a libertarian to a Democrat and ran for office and started having conversations kind of similar to this one. But in Utah, there's such a super majority that there's really no way out. It would be horrible to have won because I don't really feel like I could initiate change here, which is okay. If the majority of your zip code is voting one way, that's why they live here. But yeah, that is what inspired me to do it.
And you've lived in Tooele your whole life. Do you have any plans on moving out of the county or the state?
Well, I've moved around my whole life too. I was born outside of Chicago. We moved to Utah when I was a little girl. Raised my boys in Salt Lake, moved back here into very rural, peaceful, very quiet vacation type place to live.
Yeah.
And, I do love Salt Lake. My network is here. My people are here. I spent the last 5 years living in other states as well. And that's my dog. Living in other states, did some time in Denver, been in San Diego, LA, running around. I'm back in Utah, and then I spent some time in Arizona, Mesquite area.
What's what is one thing that you would change if you could go back in time at any point in your career?
It would really, I'm such the type of person that really lives in the moment, and I never try to really get stuck on a regret or a what if.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if there was one thing I could redo, I don't know. I think about things, when Overstock started and we were all hardwired. Everything was hardwired. It was all hard coded. And, we made decisions on top of that. And then all of a sudden clouds came out and software as a service. And it was like, ding, ding, ding. If I'd have known that, I'd have done, a lot of different decisions early on. But as far as skipping and running and bumping into things and falling down and making mistakes, I think they're all worth it.
If you asked me the same question, I wouldn't be able to tell you a good answer as well. And I think that's the same thing with a lot of entrepreneurs. And but ironically, we have this. Most people would have this system, and especially when you're building a career in business or building a business, you often have a self feedback mechanism that's running constantly. I've had Kara Golden from Hintwater on, and she spoke about the process of learning from the past in order to create your future. And it was a really interesting process to kind of uncover everyone's process of learning, because a lot of times we're not really aware of what's happening. And so with your career, what has been your superpower throughout that your journey? And you spoke a little bit about your experience when you were in grade 5 and 6 and kind of looking at commercials and coming up with better ideas. Is that what your superpower is?
No, I would think my superpower is literally raising my hand. And I mean in the literal sense of like being in a room full of people and having someone say something and me say, I don't know what that word is.
Mm.
And some people chuckling, but being like, I don't know what the word is. That's not easy to do. But rather than get lost, I'd have to know what the word is, or saying, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know the answer. I don't know. I don't know what you're talking about.
I love that.
Or saying, there was a very key point in my career where I was at the office with the CEO. I was the newest person in the room. So there was this, I joined the B2B department, which is,
Yeah.
I also dissolved that department in like 2004. But, we were in the room. I'm the newest person there. There's 2 females and a guy, and then our CEO. And he's asking all these questions. And he says, I think it was like the department was going to do, $12 million or something. I can't remember. But he goes, whose head can I put on the chopping block for this? Like, whose head is on the chopping block for this? And now I'm looking at these 3 people, like, whose head is on it? I don't know who, like, who is in charge here? And I just looked at him and nobody did anything. So I just went, I'll do it. Mine. Put my head on the chopping block. So I thought, I can do what he's saying. It's not like, I don't think I can do it. Like, okay, let's get out of this meeting. I'll do it. And that was a key moment because I jumped ahead. I always felt like, oh, that would be stepping on their toes. That would be, look, if you don't want to raise your hand, don't raise your hand. That's what came out of it. And from that, I kind of got the department, and it wasn't just my ability to grow it, because I grew it to 20 million, but it was also the idea that I could put my head on the chopping block. Like I could, I never got in so much trouble when I was younger that I felt unloved.
Yeah.
Or that I made and I messed stuff up, but like such a big mistake that it was unrecoverable. So maybe that was part of it. But there were tons of time where I'd be looking at a group of people and just being like, seriously, I'll do it. I'll do it. Give it to me. I'll do it. And raising your hand when you're sitting in a classroom, when you are anywhere, is a big. Who wants to volunteer to go on stage at the comedy club? Nobody. Everybody's pointing at their friend. Nobody. Who wants to answer the question at the stand-up with the CEO, even if you know the answer? Nobody. Not one person. And that's why, it's important. It's important to know, talked about being a woman and in the workroom and working amongst, pre-Me Too era. That type of knowing when and where is super important, no matter who you are and what room you're in. There's a hierarchy that exists the minute you walk in it, and you got to get your space to know those moments when it's appropriate to raise your hand. That's your time, and I think that was the difference.
That's incredible. And I think given the context of where you started your career, and that's even more impressive. what's your advice for people going through well, interestingly, in a similar context today, where the future is kind of uncharted and unclear, and where anything goes, especially today, where we're in a pandemic?
My
What's
heart,
your biggest
yeah.
advice?
Well, first of all, I just want to say to the millennials and Gen Z that, those are my sons. They're millennials. Gen Z are my grandchildren, which, they can't call me the G word. I don't like it. However, they are teaching me so much. And I realize it's from the way that, the Gen X taught them.
Yeah.
The way we were raised by boomers in a silent generation of always like putting on rose-colored glasses and hiding behind it and not sharing and being vulnerable. And, now we're at the place, for my generation, it was like, we're going to dance. We're just going to start, we are hard workers, but we're going to push it like we were a little bit of rebels, but kind of within a box. Like it was a really interesting generation. But what we did with our kids, which was teach them, no, you don't have to think that way. Oh, no, you don't. You get to question that. And what the millennials have done with that and what Gen Z is doing with it is insanely inspiring. They're the reason I can think in the spot of like having 5 different jobs and doing what I want to do is because that's what this generation is teaching me as an executive that managed them well. There was a skill set for me on how to work with millennials and keep them inspired and keep them engaged because we'd lose them. We would lose them. You want to go in, run a few more reports and grind, which, a company like Overstock, it's hard to not do once you get to a certain size. The millennials like, I'm out. I don't even work on Fridays. Why am I here? And without like hardcore, the majority of them were hardcore against, I'm sorry, it's 5:00 and I ski.
Yeah.
And that was a good lesson because my mom's generation and what she taught me was, no, you work till your hands are bloody. You sleep there, you get the job done, you be the best employee, hard work, pride in what you do. That led to 15-hour days for 15 years.
Oof.
Worth every second. However, there is a different world. And I think it's beautiful. So my advice would be, honestly, to those entering the workforce, don't lose that. But this old school way of thinking, there's some value in it that should not be lost in translation. So every generation, if you go to Peru and they bequeath all their Peruvian history to their, to the next generations, and they make sure that their stories are told. Native Americans do the same thing. The old stories of business, the idea that we had to, I remember working in an office when the fax machine came out. It was like, I can fax you something instead of like put a stamp on an envelope.
Yeah.
Thought process there that mattered, and I think that that world is a dying breed and dying habits, but not all of them were bad. And so listen to your elders.
Listen to your elders.
Mm-hmm.
What is or who are your greatest mentors or sources of inspiration throughout your career?
Well, the founder and CEO of Overstock absolutely did a lot for my career by giving me the opportunities in which that I could really perform and succeed. Through him, I was able to meet some amazing people like General Jack Bessie, who was Joint Chiefs of Staff to Ronald Reagan, or Warren Buffett, who was, I was fortunate enough to spend a few days with, over the years. There were Gordon Macklin, who was on our board and was one of the founders of NASDAQ. And so, as I was just saying, Jack Byrne, who was Patrick Byrne's dad, that was CEO of Geico, and the world called him the Babe Ruth of insurance. Like, when do you get to meet people like that? So those people, when I just said how ironic this would come out, listen to your elders. Those are the people that were in my mind, these little moments, these little pieces of advice, these little things that gave me confidence, having not gone to college and having to sit in the room with the best of the best. I met General Colin Powell once through another way, but he, his warmth and demeanor and generosity and humility, brought out was another lesson because of who I thought he was. And, so there's just these moments, but they were all with elders where I just took the time to listen and maybe, be present versus, be greedy with their time or ask a lot of questions. They were amazing to me all in their own way. And, many others, Colonel Jack Jacobs, who is out of New York. I think he's won 2 Purple Heart recipients, but Google him, Google Colonel Jack Jacobs. Oh my gosh. What a man. What a guy. What a hero. And he's, around today doing amazing things. And he's continued to be that guy. To even have him on my Rolodex is incredible. The Wounded Warriors. I love the military. I love, there's just so many people. And my mom's a big one. My dad, the way they just taught me, they never said you had to be a doctor. They never said you had to be, they never said I had to be a doctor, that I had to be a lawyer, that I had to be anything. They never said what, societal construct I had to live amongst. They only said work hard and be happy. And that was the rule.
Interesting that my parents had the exact same thing for me. They were, in fact, ironically, that was what drove me. They were, because I was in a scholarship, and I'm based in Singapore now, but I was born and raised in Malaysia, where my parents are. And I came to the country when I was 12 years old on a scholarship. It's a pretty young age to be alone.
To Singapore?
Yep, that's right. And
at 12 years old?
Yeah. And I was living in a boarding school. And I was at some point I was struggling, and I was talking to my mom about it. I was just facing some difficulties, and she was like, if you are ever too stressed out, if you're ever in trouble, it's totally okay to say, this is not for me. I want to come home. I'll welcome you with open arms. That's what she said. And I took that as a challenge. I was like, you think I can do it? I'm going to do it. I'm going to show you that I can. And that kind of set me on the path of just staying my course and ending up.
But the idea that, you never had to let that stress build up. That was the beauty of her words. It's like, it didn't get that stressful because you were like, you know what? I can go home so I can take it because I know that I can leave at any time. And that safety net and acceptance from parents is huge.
Acceptance. That's the word. Yeah.
It's huge to have that from your parents where it's like, you know what? Go ahead and fail.
Yeah. And it's okay.
Yeah, nothing's going to happen.
That's huge. And I never thought about it that much until I've started having conversations like this recently. So, very, very grateful. Stormy, talking about cannabis, in the e-commerce world, in the D2C world, cannabis is a growing industry. What are some of the opportunities that you see that e-commerce entrepreneurs listening could embark on?
It was super fascinating. So when I jumped in 2016, I'm like, my digital skills are going to do amazing. No, there were so many rules still there, advertising rules, state by state of the union, literally different state laws and all the things that surround it. What I would say is, it depends. Like if It depends on where you're going to be. Like, if you know e-commerce, you know how small it makes the world.
Yeah.
And that is a very unique thing. You also know that's not an easy thing to do. You know, you look at Amazon, you look at Overstock, you look at Wayfair, you look at, eBay's different consumer to consumer, but it's like, that's not easy. I think that that's easy, even though the barrier to entry is now easy. Like, you can go on Shopify, you can go in, you can make your stuff, and you're there. The rest, this dog, the rest is hard. You want to go global, you want a big brand, you want to handle customer service. Don't fool yourself. That's real work. What I would say to e-commerce and cannabis is exactly that. Like, where, some of these companies are going to be in the state of California. I don't know if they ever get licensed in Michigan or go after grows there. Then there's those large companies that are already in multi-states. They're operating within a multi-states. And then there's bureaucracy of, like, once we start going, internationally, who's going to really own it then? And who knows? Goes under alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, or is it agriculture? Like, what is it? Is it medicine? Where does it go? DEA, farmers, alcohol? It's a really interesting thing. So as an e-commerce play, you can spend a lot of money building your site, and you can do all kinds of fancy things that we all know about. Maybe not all of us, but we can all figure out, or we're all interested in. In this particular industry, I think it's important to know why that would be important.
Keep an eye on the legislations.
Yeah, like why are you digitally doing what you're doing? Are you doing it because you're a cannabis brand and you're informing your zip code about your flower and your joints and your edibles? And, are you a informational brand where it does make more sense to punch through, different barriers? Or maybe you're like Snoop Dogg and you just want to sell your papers and your, pens and your paraphernalia. So there's all of these worlds, where these cannabis cannapreneurs are coming out.
Yeah.
Some of them are really just social influencers. And how do they, so it's pretty interesting until that we strip the borders, our state borders down and see, what does that digital presence, reach, and investment bring you? You can be the best of the best, but it doesn't mean you win. You can be the best of the best digitally on your platform, but it doesn't mean you win anything.
Interesting. So what I'm hearing is we got to think beyond just the channel alone. Just just e-commerce alone is not enough. You got to keep an eye on legislation. Keep an eye on
I would write.
what
Yeah,
your
your
why is.
competitors. It's super interesting. I mean, it's a moving target on so many different verticals, and there's so many new people entering the space every day and new states.
Stormy, what's one advice that you can give to an entrepreneur that's on their journey right now, struggling in the middle of in the weeds, if you will, and they may not be able to see the light at the end of the tunnel, or they may just be so swamped with work that nothing else seems to matter? What's your advice for that person?
My advice would be flexible with your program. Like, don't get so fixated, because once you're that deep in and you're in the weeds and you are fighting for the success, make sure that end goal is still the right success, because you go a couple years, with I want this. You get in there a couple years with what you want, and this might be a little different. Don't forget the years before the cloud, some of the decisions that I made, that were made.
Yeah.
So always be flexible with your pivots. There may be a stepping stone in between you and what you want that takes you a little off course, but there's enough relativity that maybe it's not exactly. look at those moments quite seriously. Don't get so far in the weeds that you forget to see, the swamp, which is connected to a beautiful river, which is connected, so like, let your idea change, fail fast with some stuff. And, but don't forget the excitement. Don't forget when you're starting something. So I've seen folks, and I haven't started something, right? I've been going around 5 years, starting little things and thinking like, oh, I'm not ready, because I know what it means. So you got to be ready. And then don't be afraid to adjust. Like, nobody wins. Your first idea is never your best. Always a little bit of improvement.
Yeah.
Always a little bit of adjustment. Nobody, look at Overstock today. It did not start out as Overstock. It did not start out as inline products. It started out as Overstock. Literally flips. We didn't even know what the inventory was. Today, It's a brand new product. There's an Overstock section. There's, but that's very different from the day that it started. If the idea was, oh no, that's the idea, that's why it's called Overstock, that's it. There would have been, if Amazon had stayed a bookstore.
Yeah.
Some of those decisions are happening in the weeds, in the beginning, in the earliest stages. And so, don't spend all your money on that one thing. Just be smart.
Don't get too caught up with.
Pivot. Yeah, there's always tomorrow. You can get there. Shoot. A, B, C, D, E, F, or A, B, F, G, C, D, E, F. Like, you get to take your path. You can put as many steps in between as you want.
That's really good advice, and a good reminder for me as well. I often get caught up with wanting to achieve that point B, that I just forget about the progress that we've made along the way, and we may have opportunities along the way that we could have jumped on. And Stormy, thank you so much for being on the show. Guys listening, Lunch with Stormy is available. It's a podcast dedicated to amazing conversations. And I believe you had Tommy Chong on the show as well.
I did. Yes, I had Tommy Chong on. It was one of my moments, he's an icon, just an icon, and one of my favorite people. What an amazing gentleman who has really hit society and made an impact in many places, including cannabis.
Definitely go check that episode out. One of my favorite.
Thank you.
And Stormy, what is the best way to get in touch with you, connect with you? Do you have social?
I'm Stormy Simon on everything. So I'm really easy to find. I do coaching. I do, little executive. I like startups over big stuff. So you can find me on all the channels. I'm super easy accessible, and I'm always happy and willing and hopeful to help out folks that need the up when they're learning to pivot from the weeds.
And if you're a female-led entrepreneur, if you have a female-led business, definitely connect with Stormy. She's definitely have an advice or two for you. That's Stormy, right. Thank you so much for being on the show. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Josh. I appreciate it too. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the E-commerce Profits Podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get notified of future episodes.